is the scene at the Kabul airport where I think if you look at Western press, they're reporting that 20 people have died in the past week. It's
Mm.
unclear to me how many of those people have died in the airport, how many of those people were the two or three that died falling off a plane, if they're counting the person who was found in the landing gear, and then,
Yeah.
people who have been crushed to death outside of the Kabul airport. I saw a statement from the Taliban today saying that basically they were doing the Americans' dirty work outside the Kabul airport. I don't think it was from an official Taliban account, just some a Taliban official had said that, and
Yeah.
that seems to generally be the case right now. Essentially, because of the American occupation and the way we left the country, there's a mob scene right now at the Kabul airport. Now, I don't know. Maybe there's no way to prevent a mob scene at the airport. Will there's probably more people that were going to want to leave than the U.S. Government bureaucracy was ever going to take out of that country, and so it's very possible that in no way you could prevent the mob scene at the airport. But this really, while the Taliban are affecting the crowd control, if they weren't doing that, then it would be the Americans. And so, while I feel like they're making a lot of, especially in the Western press, a lot of noise about the 7 or so many people who have been crushed to death or somehow killed outside the airport, it doesn't, at least from a lot of reporting, it doesn't seem like the Taliban are doing anything particularly terrible out there. It's just a matter of you have people who are desperately trying to get out of the country, and people get trampled to death when too many people are going for an exit. And I don't know if this is exactly what they're making it out to be, as like some brutal Taliban actions that are killing a bunch of people. So I just wanted to point all that out. And then the other thing going on is the U.S. has, I guess, enlisted 6 airlines. Most of them sounded American. United was a couple planes. Hawaiian Airlines had a couple planes. I think Qatari and Emirati Airlines are also involved. Now, it kind of seemed to me from the statement I read from United Airlines, Will, that while they were maybe co-opted by the government to doing this, now they're like in it for the PR, and they're like, we're happy to do this to help the whole mission, everything like that. And I'm sure they'll either get paid very handsomely or a nice tax write-off for doing this. But it is interesting that they had, I think, 18 civilian planes are now going to fly these Afghan refugees, not from Afghanistan, I guess from whatever second country they're bringing them to, but it sounded at least a little bit like they co-opted some of these airlines into doing this again, although
Right.
now they're all for it. Now, one of the things that I want to talk about, Will, when it comes to coverage of the Kabul airport, because we've talked about it and have been, I think, very and rightfully critical of the Biden administration for. I see only a way to see is to really screw this thing up. We're now what, like a week out from the 31st, the day they were supposed to get out, and they still are struggling to process all the Afghans. So it's not like by the 31st this would have been all wrapped up really nicely, and they just had expedited 2 weeks. And it's
Right.
very obvious from the statements that they didn't have contingency plans for what they would do if the Taliban were knocking on the doors of Kabul while we still had like the Kabul embassy and the Kabul airport being so far
Right.
away, and how they are going to handle that. So there's a lot of mistakes, a lot of red tape that seems to have gotten in the way. I think they just figured out how they're going to start processing all these Afghans. I think they're flying a ton of people out of the country that they don't actually know if they're going to qualify for the special visa. So I'm guessing they're going to have to fly a lot of people back. That's probably going to be
Right.
a pretty ugly situation. Maybe people trying to flee and be migrants in other countries. I see Turkey stepping up border security, saying that it's going to be a real migration problem for them. There's all these issues that I think, had the Biden administration really, really tried to do this thing right, it could have been done a little bit cleaner. Not that it would have ever been perfect, but it would have been done cleaner, and maybe a few less people would have died. And I'm guessing that there wouldn't be weeds with tens of thousands of people standing up at the Kabul airport. These scenes of parents passing their babies over the wall to U.S. soldiers. I think a lot of
Yeah.
that could have been avoided, and a lot less trauma inflicted on the Afghan people who haven't deserved this the whole time. But that being said, Will, the Hawks are absolutely unbelievable on this, and they're making it out
Yeah.
to be that the only mistake America ever made in 20 years was leaving in a chaotic manner. It's absolutely
Yeah.
unbelievable. And so there's two really good articles that kind of touch on this at the Quincy Institute today. One by Jim Loeb, where he goes in and breaks down the amount of time that the American, not mainstream, not cable news will, but the regular news, I think ABC, NBC, and CBS, those
Right.
three, and he breaks down the amount of time that they've covered Afghanistan. And for people looking at the show right now, you can see this graph where after 2008, 2009, where there were 735 minutes of coverage for a full year between those three networks, it significantly drops off. And by 2012, it's not even 3 hours of an hour of coverage per network a year. And so
Wow.
there's just absolutely, Americans aren't aware of this. In 2016, it was 27 minutes of total time. And in 2020, it was only 5 minutes of total time. And so, this is to show that Americans haven't in any way been exposed to what's going on in Afghanistan. The media hasn't even bothered to cover it. So all these years, especially during the Trump years, where he really ramped up, we're one of the only people that covered that. You know why? I mean, we're probably one
Yeah.
of the largest shows that actually took time to say Trump is dropping 6,000 bombs plus a year on Afghanistan. That's 20 plus bombs a day. He's carrying out all these, different operations. The U.S. is killing more citizens than the Taliban in the country. We're killing record numbers of civilians, and there's no coverage of it at all. And then suddenly there's a mob scene at the airport. And in all honesty, Will, I don't want to downplay the violence that happened in Kabul. I don't want to, the people that have died. I think a little girl they're saying maybe got crushed. Absolutely awful. But they haven't covered the Islamic State suicide bombings in the capital of Afghanistan the past couple of years. They haven't covered the U.S. Massacring numbers of civilians with drone strikes and airstrikes in the past couple of years. Far more people have died in U.S. airstrikes. They barely gave any coverage at the time in 2015 when Obama killed all those people in the Kudus airport. And so it's very telling that the only time the life of an Afghan matters to any of these people that they're willing to bother to cover it and talk about it, Will, is when they could use those lives to continue to bomb Afghanistan and fund their war state. And I
Right.
thought that that coverage was very telling. If there had been good coverage of all this, Will, and they had talked to the American people the whole time and explained that, yeah, we're drawing down and we only have 2,400 forces in Afghanistan, but we have to carry out 6,000 airstrikes a year to deter the Taliban advance. Then, when Bill Kristol, the giant idiot, is out there going, oh, this is a low-cost war, we could do, a couple American casualties a year. No, it's not a couple American casualties a year. It's thousands of Afghans dying at the result of American airstrikes in that country. That's a part of the cost of the war, too. And he's saying that we have to wage this low-cost war for the lives of the Afghan people. It's an
Yep.
absolute absurdity, and he should be laughed, and every American should know to laugh at the buffoon. And yet, people take him like an authority because nobody's bothered to cover what's happened in Afghanistan in the past couple of years. It's also, if there was more than 5 minutes of coverage in Afghanistan last year, Will, maybe people would understand and not be so stupid to believe that we could continue to wage this war without any American casualties, because the mainstream media would have said the only reason there's not an American casualty during last year, 2020, Afghans fighting season, was because there was a peace deal between the U.S.
Exactly.
and the Taliban. And there was
That's
just
right.
no coverage of it. They didn't bother to talk about it at all. Imagine that. America's largest war, they signed the deal to end that thing, longest war, they signed it to end it last year, Will, and there was 5 minutes of coverage on ABC, CBS, and NBC. How is that?
Yeah.
I mean, that alone should be telling to the American people that they're being lied to all the time. Now, the other
Yeah.
article is Ben Armbruster, and he gets into a lot of the kind of the same issue here, where senators are now demanding an investigation of Biden's withdrawal process, which I don't think is something irrelevant. To talk about
Right.
the decisions that were made to leave all this military equipment at the Kandahar airfield and stuff like that that were obviously going to be taken over by the Taliban. The fact that they didn't really have a process in place for the Afghan citizens that didn't have a passport until a couple days ago. Like, all these things are absolutely inexcusable, and heads
Yeah.
should roll at the State Department, at the Pentagon, and in the White House for it. However, for all the bad things that have happened in the past week, it is minuscule to what the U.S. has done to Afghanistan in the past 20 years. And in 2019, December 2019, well, we had the Afghan papers that came out, and they went and showed in these papers, in this report, that the U.S. political and military leaders have been knowingly lying to the American people for 20 years about this war to keep it going. And there's
Yep.
no demand for event. He has the Google results shorts here, search here for their websites for Senator Reid, Senator Warner, and there's no search results at all for Afghanistan papers. And these are senators and key, congressional positions that could have the committee hearings and everything. And so, Will,
Yeah.
I just wanted to talk about this because we had spent a lot of time about the scenes at the Kabul airport. And again, I think we rightfully criticize the Biden administration. But unlike all these other media outlets, we have covered Afghanistan the whole time. Well, not the whole war because we weren't old enough to, but
Right.
essentially, the past, what, like 5 years or so, Will, me and you have been on this the entire time talking about what's happening in Afghanistan every week. And our audience knows that while the withdrawal is chaotic, it was the really only decision that Biden had to make at that time was to get out of the country, and that while it could have gone better, it was the right decision and not to believe the crap from the war hawk. So I don't know if you have anything about this. We move on to Cuba though.
Yeah, yeah. I just wanted to say that, like, I think that this lack of coverage did create a lot of these weird expectations of what might happen when we left. And just like the media, as much as politicians, dropped the ball in trying to explain what was going on here to people. And so when we finally do leave, people have all these expectations that it'll be nice and orderly. And no, that's not what's going to happen here. But I do agree too that Biden he deserves criticism for the way this has all been organized. It seems like they should have been more prepared for the Taliban to possibly march into Kabul. However, I don't want to let that, like, I think a lot of the hawks are completely allowing this to overshadow the good, obviously the good news of the war ending. So, like, certainly I'm willing to criticize Biden on this, but I don't want to let that overshadow that ultimately this is the right decision. Even though it's not been managed the best, I do think this is the right move, and there is no other move to make.
Right. And what they're trying to do is craft a narrative that if you end a war as a president, it's going to be a political blow to you. And even if 70% of Americans support ending the war, that people could be turned against the president. Even a president that's got as soft hands and gentle hands from the press as Biden has. Suddenly today at his press conference, well, I don't know if you caught this, I think it was a CBS reporter that cited a poll to Biden saying that, like, a majority of people didn't think he had the mental capacity to be president or something like this. And so the media has turned on Biden. It's very interesting because the only time they were kind to Trump, Will, this is when he bombed Syria. And so
That's right. It's presidential. When he
right,
did
and
that.
now you have Biden, where the only time they criticize him for anything at all, for all of his mistakes and blunders, and like last week saying we didn't have troops in Syria, or the time he said that Iran wasn't able to enrich uranium, or any of the ridiculous COVID measures. No criticism whatsoever, but trying to leave Afghanistan is what they will blast him for.